In the smoky skies above Tokyo on March 10, 1945, nearly 300 massive silver bombers descended through the darkness like mechanical birds of prey. Below them stretched one of the world's most densely populated cities, home to over 1 million souls packed into wooden structures that would soon become kindling. These were no ordinary aircraft. They were Boeing B-29 Superfortresses, the most technologically advanced bombers ever created, and they were about to unleash the single most destructive conventional air raid in human history. But the story of how these revolutionary aircraft came to dominate the Pacific skies and ultimately force Japan's surrender begins years earlier, born from a desperate need and an audacious vision. The B-29 Superfortress didn't emerge overnight. Its origins trace back to 1938, when Boeing began working on pressurized long-range bomber concepts. The United States Army Air Corps, watching the clouds of war gather over Europe and Asia, recognized a chilling reality. America had no aircraft capable of reaching distant enemy territories and returning safely. In December 1939, the Army Air Corps issued a formal specification that seemed almost impossible to fulfill. They wanted a super bomber capable of delivering 20,000 pounds of bombs to a target 2,667 miles away at a speed of 400 miles per hour. This was more than double the range of existing bombers. Several companies submitted designs, including Douglas, Lockheed, and Consolidated, but it was Boeing's Model 345 that would ultimately win the competition. Boeing received an order for 2 prototypes on August 24, 1940. In a move that demonstrated extraordinary confidence in the design, the order was expanded on May 17, 1941, to include 14 service test aircraft and 250 production bombers. This happened before the first prototype had even flown. The aircraft was officially named the Superfortress, deliberately echoing its predecessor, the legendary B-17 Flying Fortress, while emphasizing its superiority. The first XB-29 prototype rolled out onto the runway at Boeing Field in Seattle on September 21, 1942. Nearly all of Boeing's employees turned out to witness this momentous occasion. The sleek, silver giant represented over 1,300,000 man-hours of work. With its distinctive pencil-like fuselage, heavily glazed nose, and 4 massive R-3350 radial engines, the B-29 looked like nothing else in the sky. But triumph quickly turned to tragedy. On February 18, 1943, test pilot Eddie Allen was conducting flight tests on the second XB-29 prototype when an engine fire developed. The fire burned through the wing spar, causing it to collapse. The massive bomber crashed into a fry meat packing plant 3 miles from Boeing Field, killing all 11 men aboard the aircraft and 18 workers in the plant. It was a devastating setback that could have ended the program. Instead, the tragedy spurred engineers to solve the aircraft's most persistent problem, the Wright R-3350 engines. These powerful but temperamental engines would plague the B-29 throughout its development and even into combat operations. They had a tendency to overheat, catch fire, and swallow valves. But with war raging and the need urgent, there was no time to start over. Engineers would have to make them work. What made the B-29 Superfortress truly revolutionary wasn't just its size or range, but its unprecedented technological sophistication. In 1944, when it entered combat, it represented the cutting edge of aeronautical engineering. The B-29 featured the first fully pressurized crew compartments in a bomber aircraft. The forward compartment housed the bombardier, aircraft commander, pilot, flight engineer, navigator, and radio operator. A separate aft pressurized compartment contained the gunners. Since the bomb bays weren't pressurized, engineers devised an innovative solution: a pressurized tunnel connecting the fore and aft crew areas. This pressurization allowed the aircraft to fly at altitudes above 30,000 feet, where crews could operate in relative comfort without bulky oxygen equipment. The defensive armament system was equally revolutionary. The B-29 employed an analog computer-controlled fire control system that allowed one gunner and a fire control officer to direct 4 remote machine gun turrets. This was unprecedented technology for the time. The aircraft bristled with defensive weapons. 4 remotely aimed 50-caliber machine guns in the forward dorsal turret, 2 in each of the aft dorsal, forward ventral, and aft ventral turrets, plus 2 more 50-caliber guns in the tail position. Early models even mounted a 20mm cannon in the tail, though this was later removed due to sighting problems. The B-29's bomb load capacity was staggering for its era. It could carry up to 20,000 pounds of ordnance internally, 4 times the capacity of the B-24 Liberator and 5 times that of the B-17 Flying Fortress. The aircraft's maximum fuel capacity reached 9,363 gallons, equivalent to an entire railroad tank car. Structurally, the B-29 was enormous. It had a wingspan of 141 feet and 2 inches, weighed about 70,000 pounds fully laden, and could reach speeds of over 357 miles per hour. Its service ceiling exceeded 31,000 feet. The 11-man crew included pilots, bombardiers, navigators, specialists, and dedicated gunners, all working in concert to operate this flying fortress. But bringing this technological marvel into existence required an industrial effort of unprecedented scale. The Battle of Kansas, manufacturing under pressure. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the B-29 program shifted into high gear. What had been an ambitious development project became a matter of national survival. The Army Air Forces made a bold wartime gamble. They ordered the plane into quantity production months before the first prototype had even flown. Manufacturing the B-29 was a complex task involving 4 main assembly factories to keep up with demand. Boeing operated plants at Renton, Washington, and Wichita, Kansas. Bell Aircraft established a facility at Marietta, Georgia, near Atlanta. Martin operated a plant at Bellevue, Nebraska, near what is today Offutt Air Force Base. Thousands of subcontractors were also involved in the project. By the war's end, nearly 4,000 B-29s had been built, but production didn't go smoothly. General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the Army Air Forces, visited the Boeing plant in Wichita, Kansas, on March 9, 1944, expecting to see the first B-29s deploying to combat. Instead, he discovered that none of them were ready to go. The famous Arnold temper erupted in what became known as the Battle of Kansas. Arnold's rage sparked a crash program. Workers labored around the clock in the frigid Kansas winter, implementing last-minute modifications to prepare the bombers for their 11,500-mile journey to the combat theater. Despite the chaos and pressure, the first 11 B-29s deployed to India by the end of March 1944. More would follow throughout the spring. The most widely produced variant was the standard B-29, of which 2,537 aircraft were built. The improved B-29A, featuring a redesigned wing with a span 12 inches greater than the standard model and a 4-gun forward top turret, was produced exclusively at Boeing's Renton plant. 1,122 B-29 as were manufactured. At $3.7 billion, the B-29 program ranked as the single most expensive weapons system of World War II, costing American taxpayers more than even the Manhattan Project atomic bomb. This enormous investment created tremendous pressure on Army Air Forces leadership to prove the aircraft's worth. Operation Matterhorn, the China-Burma-India Challenge. The B-29's first combat missions flew from one of the most logistically challenging theaters of World War II, the China-Burma-India Theater, or CBI. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, no American aircraft could reach the Japanese home islands from any existing base. The nearest friendly territory capable of hosting bombers lay 1,600 miles away in central China, well beyond the operating radius of B-17s and B-24s. The solution was Operation Matterhorn, approved at the Sexton Conference in Cairo in November 1943. This ambitious plan called for basing B-29s in India while staging them through forward airfields around Chengdu in China's Sichuan province to strike Japan. The operation represented a Herculean logistical undertaking. The Japanese had cut the Burma Road in March 1942, leaving only one supply route to China, over the hump, the treacherous air ferry route across the Himalayas. Every gallon of fuel, every pound of ammunition, every spare part needed by American forces in China had to be flown over the world's highest mountain range in treacherous weather conditions with the constant threat of Japanese fighter interception. Building the necessary infrastructure required extraordinary effort. In India, multiple airfields had to be constructed to accommodate the B-29's massive size and weight. The aircraft's 141-foot wingspan was considerably wider than any existing bomber, and a fully laden Superfortress weighed about 70 tons. Engineers built a petroleum pipeline system stretching over 100 miles, along with internal lines and storage tanks at each base. In China, the construction challenges were even more daunting. With no concrete or cement available, 500,000 Chinese workers carried rocks on their shoulders and heads up to 7 miles in each direction, then broke the rock by hand. In a feat that Colonel Henry Byrode, who directed the operation, called unbelievable, they completed the airfields in just 90 days. The first B-29 to arrive in the China-Burma-India theater was Gone with the Wind, which landed at Chaklia Airfield, 80 miles west of Calcutta, on April 2, 1944. By May 8, 130 B-29s had reached India. The buildup of XX Bomber Command had begun. On June 5, 1944, the B-29s flew their first combat mission, attacking railroad yards in Bangkok, Thailand. Then, on June 15, 47 Superfortresses launched from Chinese bases for the first bombing raid on the Japanese home islands since the Doolittle Raid of April 1942. They struck the Imperial Iron and Steel Works at Yada on Kyushu. It was a historic moment, but the raid caused minimal damage. Operation Matterhorn soon revealed its fundamental flaw. The logistics were unsustainable. The B-29s themselves had to haul much of their own fuel and supplies from India to China over the hump. It took 7 B-29 sorties to stockpile enough fuel and bombs in China to mount a single combat mission. The operation consumed nearly 15% of all hump tonnage while producing minimal results. From June 1944 to January 1945, China-based B-29s dropped approximately 800 tons of bombs on Japanese home island targets. This was insufficient to produce any significant impact. Worse, the Japanese launched Operation Ichigo in late 1944, threatening the vulnerable Chinese bases. In August 1944, Major General Curtis LeMay took command of XX Bomber Command. The hard-driving LeMay immediately recognized the operation's limitations. He later wrote, "Despite some modest successes and the lessons learned, we really didn't accomplish as much in China as we had hoped. That would come later when we moved the B-29 bases to the Marianas." By November 1944, American forces had captured the Mariana Islands in the Central Pacific, providing bases much closer to Japan with far better logistics. In January 1945, XX Bomber Command abandoned its Chinese bases and concentrated resources in India before eventually relocating entirely to the Marianas. Operation Matterhorn had ended. While the operation failed to achieve its strategic objectives, it provided invaluable lessons about B-29 operations and crew training that would prove critical in the campaigns to come. The Marianas, a new chapter in strategic bombing. Everything changed when American forces seized the Mariana Islands of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam in the summer of 1944. These islands, located approximately 1,500 miles south of Tokyo, provided the perfect basis for sustained B-29 operations against Japan. Unlike the precarious Chinese airfields, the Marianas could be supplied by sea, and their capture gave the United States control of airspace that Japanese fighters struggled to defend. Construction crews rapidly transformed these islands, particularly Tinian, into massive air bases. By the war's end, Tinian would become home to the world's largest airfield, capable of launching hundreds of B-29s on a single mission. The XXI Bomber Command, under Brigadier General Haywood Hansel, began operations from the Marianas on November 17, 1944, with a raid on Tokyo. Initially, the Marianas-based B-29s conducted high-altitude precision bombing raids similar to those flown over Germany by B-17s and B-24s. The bombers would fly at altitudes above 25,000 feet in daylight, attempting to strike specific industrial targets with high-explosive bombs. But these missions produced disappointing results. Several factors conspired against the precision bombing campaign. The B-29s encounter mechanical problems, particularly with their temperamental right, R-3350 engines, which continued to overheat and fail at high altitudes. Japanese air defenses, while not as formidable as those over Germany, still inflicted losses. Most critically, the bombers encountered a phenomenon that meteorologists were just beginning to understand: the jet stream. These powerful high-altitude winds, often exceeding 200 miles per hour, played havoc with bombing accuracy. Bombers flying with the jet stream raced past their targets too quickly for accurate bombing. Flying against it, they became slow-moving targets for anti-aircraft fire. The weather over Japan also frequently featured cloud cover that obscured targets, making visual bombing impossible. General Hansel struggled to produce results, and in January 1945, General Arnold relieved him of command. Arnold turned to the man who had shown results in China, Curtis LeMay. Curtis LeMay and the fire from heaven. Major General Curtis Emerson LeMay was 38 years old when he took command of XXI Bomber Command in January 1945, but he was already one of the most experienced bomber commanders in the Army Air Forces. He had cut his teeth leading B-17 formations over Europe, pioneering formation tactics, and showing an almost reckless courage under fire. Now, facing the challenge of making the B-29 campaign effective, LeMay was willing to make radical changes. LeMay understood the problem clearly. High-altitude precision bombing wasn't working against Japan. The jet stream made accurate bombing nearly impossible. The weather was frequently unsuitable, and many targets were too small or too dispersed to hit effectively. But LeMay also understood something else. Japanese cities were uniquely vulnerable to a different kind of attack. Unlike European cities built largely of stone and brick, Japanese urban areas consisted primarily of wooden structures with paper walls, built close together in densely packed neighborhoods. Many small workshops and light industrial facilities were scattered throughout residential areas, making it impossible to distinguish between military and civilian targets. American strategists had recognized this vulnerability, conducting bombing trials at the Japanese Village Test Facility at Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah between May and September 1943. These tests demonstrated that incendiary bombs were devastatingly effective against Japanese construction. General Arnold urged LeMay to adopt incendiary bombing and abandon precision bombing doctrine. In February 1945, LeMay began testing the new approach. On February 25th, 172 B-29s conducted a daylight incendiary raid on Tokyo, destroying nearly 28,000 buildings. The results convinced LeMay that large-scale firebombing was the answer. Then LeMay made an even more radical decision. He would attack at night, from low altitude, with incendiary bombs, after stripping the B-29s of most of their defensive armament. This decision shocked his staff. Intelligence officers predicted that 70% of the bombers could be destroyed. But LeMay's reasoning was sound. Japanese night fighter capabilities were limited, anti-aircraft fire was less effective at night, and flying at low altitude eliminated the jet stream problem while allowing the bombers to carry heavier bomb loads. On March 8, 1945, LeMay issued orders for a major firebombing attack on Tokyo the following night. The target was Zone I, a rectangular area in northeastern Tokyo measuring approximately 4 miles by 3 miles, divided by the Sumida River. This area, part of the Shitamachi district, was one of the most densely populated urban areas in the world, home to about 1.1 million people living in closely spaced wooden and bamboo structures. While the area contained few major industrial facilities, it housed numerous small factories supplying Japan's war industries. The Tokyo Inferno Operation Meeting House. Just after midnight on March 10, 1945, Pathfinder B-29s arrived over Tokyo and began dropping their incendiary bombs in a large X pattern to mark the target zone. Following close behind, wave after wave of Superfortresses descended to altitudes between 5,000 and 9,000 feet, well below their normal operating height. Each bomber carried a maximum load of incendiary weapons, stripped of weight to accommodate the deadly cargo. The incendiaries included a mixture of M69 napalm cluster bombs and M47 magnesium bombs. When these weapons ignited, they created fires that reached temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The initial fires quickly coalesced into a general conflagration. Strong winds gusting between 17 and 28 miles per hour fanned the flames, though the conflagration didn't technically qualify as a firestorm due to these natural winds. The devastation was beyond anything the world had ever seen. Eyewitness accounts described an apocalyptic hellscape. The fires created massive updrafts that tossed B-29s around like toys despite their size. Crews reported that they could smell the city burning from miles away, even at their altitude. One B-29 gunner, Ed Lawson, later recalled, "The smell was nauseating. I've never smelled anything like it since, and I don't want to." The heat was so intense that it liquefied asphalt in the streets. People caught in the open were incinerated instantly. Those who tried to shelter in place suffocated as the fires consumed all available oxygen. Many who fled to canals and rivers to escape the flames died anyway, boiled alive in water that had been heated to lethal temperatures. Birds ignited in midair. The flames could be seen from 100 miles away. When the sun rose over Tokyo 6 hours after the first bombs fell, it revealed an apocalyptic wasteland. Approximately 15.8 square miles of the city had been destroyed. The official death toll was 83,793, though estimates ranged as high as 100,000 killed in a single night. More than 40,000 were injured, and over 1 million were left homeless. Of the 334 B-29s launched for Operation Meeting House, 282 reached Tokyo. 27 bombers were lost, shot down by Japanese air defenses, destroyed by mechanical failure, or caught in the massive updrafts caused by the fires below. But the raid achieved its objective of demonstrating the devastating effectiveness of low-altitude incendiary bombing. The March 9-10 raid on Tokyo was the single most destructive air raid in history, exceeding even the firebombing of Dresden and causing more immediate deaths than the atomic bombings that would follow. It marked a significant turning point in the war and in American military doctrine regarding the bombing of civilian areas. The Campaign of Fire, Japan Burns. The success of the Tokyo raid gave LeMay the green light to continue. Over the following months, American B-29s launched a systematic campaign to burn Japan's urban industrial infrastructure to ashes. The firebombing campaign was comprehensive and relentless. On March 11th and 12th, Nagoya was hit. On March 13th and 14th, Osaka burned. Kobe was struck on March 16th and 17th. These major cities suffered catastrophic damage, though none matched the destruction inflicted on Tokyo. Many civilians had fled these cities after hearing reports of the Tokyo raid, reducing casualties but not the industrial damage. LeMay's bombers didn't limit themselves to the largest cities. Medium and smaller cities also became targets. By July 1945, more than 150,000 tons of bombs were being dropped per month. On some days, 5 different cities were targeted simultaneously. The B-29s flew mission after mission, often launching raids of 300 to 500 aircraft. The devastation was staggering. By the war's end, American B-29s had struck 66 Japanese cities, burning 178 square miles of urban area to ashes. Tokyo suffered the worst damage of all, with 56.3 square miles destroyed over multiple attacks. Overall, America's bombing campaign against the Japanese homeland killed approximately 330,000 people, injured nearly 500,000 more, and left 8.5 million homeless. The campaign also included mining operations that blockaded Japanese ports, further strangling the nation's war economy. B-29s dropped naval mines in shipping lanes and harbors, sinking Japanese vessels and cutting off supply lines. These mining operations, less dramatic than the firebombing raids, were highly effective in isolating Japan. The strategic effect was exactly what LeMay had intended. Japanese war production plummeted. Industrial facilities were destroyed, workers killed or displaced, and transportation networks disrupted. By the summer of 1945, Japan's ability to wage war had been severely crippled. Yet Japanese leaders refused to surrender, sacrificing their nation in what they called a fight to the finish. LeMay himself understood the moral implications of what he was doing. He famously said, "I suppose if I had lost the war, I would have been tried as a war criminal." He also stated, "Killing Japanese didn't bother me very much at that time. It was getting the war over that bothered me." LeMay focused relentlessly on ending the war through air power, believing that the bombing campaign would ultimately save lives by making an invasion of Japan unnecessary. Silver Plate, the ultimate mission. While the conventional firebombing campaign raged, a special group of B-29s was being prepared for an even more momentous mission. In late 1944, Army Air Forces leaders selected the Martin assembly line to produce a squadron of B-29s under the code name SylVRPLAT. These aircraft received extensive modifications for a unique purpose, delivering atomic bombs. The Silver Plate modifications were substantial. All gun turrets except the tail position were removed. Armor plate was stripped out. The aircraft received Curtiss electric propellers that could provide reverse thrust. Most importantly, the bomb bay was extensively modified to accommodate either the Fat Man or Little Boy atomic bomb designs, which were massive compared to conventional ordnance. These modifications reduced the aircraft's weight by 7,200 pounds, allowing them to carry the heavy atomic weapons while maintaining performance. The Army Air Forces assigned 15 Silver Plate B-29s to a newly formed unit, the 509th Composite Group, commanded by Colonel Paul Tibbets. Tibbets was one of the most experienced B-29 pilots in the service, and he personally assembled and trained his crews for the atomic mission. The training was intensive and secretive. Crews practiced dropping specially designed practice bombs called pumpkin bombs, large, heavy weapons with conventional explosives that approximated the size and weight of the atomic bombs. The 509th flew 51 combat sorties over Japan with pumpkin bombs, both for training and to accustom Japanese air defenses to seeing small numbers of B-29s flying at high altitude. The Silver Plate B-29s were deployed to Tinian Island in the Marianas, operating from North Field. On May 9, 1945, Colonel Tibbets personally selected one aircraft to be his operational plane for the atomic mission. This Martin-built B-29-45, MO, serial number 44 to 86,292, will be named Enola Gay after Tibbets' mother. On July 16, 1945, the Manhattan Project successfully tested an atomic bomb at Trinity Site in New Mexico. The test demonstrated that the weapon worked and possessed devastating power. President Harry S. Truman, who had become president following Franklin Roosevelt's death in April, was informed of the successful test while attending the Potsdam Conference in Germany. On July 26th, the Allied leaders issued the Potsdam Declaration, calling on Japan to surrender unconditionally or face prompt and utter destruction. Japanese leaders debated the ultimatum, but ultimately chose to continue fighting, believing they could still negotiate better terms or that the Soviet Union might mediate a peace agreement. The decision to use the atomic bomb has been debated ever since. American leaders believed that Japan would fight to the last soldier, requiring an invasion that would cost hundreds of thousands of American casualties and millions of Japanese lives. The fanatical resistance on islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa seemed to confirm this assessment. The atomic bomb offered a way to end the war quickly and save lives, though at a terrible cost to the civilians of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hiroshima, dawn of the atomic age. At 2:45 in the morning, Tinian time, on August 6, 1945, Colonel Paul Tibbets and his crew of 11 lifted off from Northfield aboard the Enola Gay. The uranium bomb, known as Little Boy, sat in a modified bomb bay. Two other B-29s accompanied Enola Gay, the great artiste, carrying scientific instruments and necessary evil, assigned to take photographs. The takeoff was illuminated by floodlights at the insistence of Major General Leslie Groves, director of the Manhattan Project, who wanted the historic moment recorded. As the three aircraft made their way to Iwo Jima, where they rendezvoused at 8,010 feet, Navy Captain William Parsons armed Little Boy in flight, completing the final assembly of the weapon. At 7:30 in the morning, Tibbets announced to the crew over the intercom, "We are carrying the world's first atomic bomb." Most of the crew had suspected as much, but the confirmation brought home the magnitude of their mission. Hiroshima was the primary target, chosen for several reasons. It was an important military port and industrial center, home to the headquarters of the 5th Division and Field Marshal Hatay's 2nd General Army. The city had been deliberately left off the conventional bombing target list to preserve it as a pristine target that would clearly demonstrate the atomic bomb's power. Kakura and Nagasaki served as alternate targets. At 8:15 and 15 seconds, Hiroshima time, Bombardier Major Thomas Farabee announced bomb away. Little Boy fell from an altitude of 31,060 feet. The Enola Gay lurched violently upward, suddenly 7,000 pounds lighter. Tibbets immediately executed a sharp diving turn, banking away from the target at maximum speed to escape the blast. 43 seconds later, at 8:16 and 2 seconds, Little Boy detonated 1,968 feet above Hiroshima, 550 feet from the intended aiming point, the AIOI bridge. The explosion released energy equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT. The flash was blinding, creating temperatures exceeding 10,000 degrees at ground zero. The thermal pulse ignited everything flammable for miles. Birds caught in flight burst into flames. People near the hypocenter were vaporized instantly, leaving only shadows burned into walls and pavement. The blast wave that followed flattened buildings across a radius of more than 2 miles. Even from their distance of more than 11 miles, the Enola Gay crew felt the aircraft buffeted by 2 powerful shock waves, one direct and one reflected from the ground. Co-pilot Robert Lewis pounded Tibbets on the shoulder, shouting, "Look at that! Look at that! Look at that!" The crew watched in stunned silence as a massive mushroom cloud rose over Hiroshima, climbing to 40,000 feet and higher. The devastation was almost incomprehensible. Approximately 70,000 people died instantly, with tens of thousands more succumbing to injuries and radiation sickness in the following weeks and months. Nearly 70% of Hiroshima's buildings were destroyed. The city had essentially ceased to exist as a functioning urban center. The Enola Gay landed back at Tinian 12 hours after takeoff. Tibbets was immediately awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. But the war wasn't over yet. Nagasaki, the second bomb. Japanese leaders struggled to comprehend what had happened to Hiroshima. Initial reports were confused and fragmentary. Some military officials refused to believe that a single bomb could cause such destruction. The Japanese government made no immediate move to surrender. On August 8th, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria, eliminating any hope that the Soviets might mediate peace negotiations. On August 9th, just 3 days after Hiroshima, a second atomic mission was launched. The second bomb, a plutonium implosion device called Fat Man, was assigned to the B-29 boxcar, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney. The primary target was Kakura, a major industrial center. The Enola Gay flew weather reconnaissance for the mission, while the Great Artiste and Big Stink provided observation and photographic support. But the Nagasaki mission encountered problems from the start. Boxcar arrived over Kokura nearly 7 hours after takeoff to find the city obscured by clouds and smoke from the previous day's conventional bombing of nearby Yada. After making 3 unsuccessful bombing runs over 50 minutes, with fuel running low, Sweeney made the decision to proceed to the secondary target, Nagasaki. When Boxcar reached Nagasaki 20 minutes later, that city was also covered by dense clouds. Mission rules required visual identification of the target. Weaponeer Commander Frederick Ashworth proposed using radar bombing, but at that moment, a small opening appeared in the clouds. Bombardier Captain Kermit Behan identified target features, and at 10:58 local time, Fat Man was released. The bomb detonated 43 seconds later with a yield equivalent to 21 kilotons of TNT at an altitude of 1,650 feet. The explosion occurred about 1.5 miles northwest of the intended aiming point. Because of this miss and the geography of Nagasaki, which is divided by hills and valleys, the destruction was more confined than at Hiroshima. The blast was largely contained within the Urakami Valley, protecting much of the city. Nevertheless, the devastation was terrible. Nearly half of Nagasaki was destroyed, and between 40,000 and 70,000 people were killed. Co-pilot Fred Olivi later described the moment. Suddenly, the light of 1,000 suns illuminated the cockpit. Even with my dark welder's goggles, I winced and shut my eyes for a couple of seconds. The surrender. Mission accomplished. The 2 atomic bombings, combined with the Soviet declaration of war and the relentless conventional bombing campaign, finally convinced Japanese leaders that continued resistance was futile. On August 10th, Japan indicated its willingness to surrender, provided the emperor could retain his position. After some negotiation over terms, Japan formally accepted unconditional surrender on August 14th, 1945. The formal surrender ceremony took place on September 2nd aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, officially ending World War II. The war that had begun with Japanese aggression in China and the attack on Pearl Harbor ended with Japan devastated, occupied, and utterly defeated. The B-29 Superfortress had achieved what its creators had envisioned. It had delivered the blows that brought Japan to its knees. From the first tentative missions from Chinese bases to the devastating firebombing campaign to the ultimate horror of atomic weapons, the Superfortress had proven itself the war-winning weapon that General Arnold had gambled billions of dollars to create. Legacy. The Superfortress after the war. After the war, the B-29 returned to the United States and continued in service. Many aircraft were converted for different roles, including aerial refueling tankers, reconnaissance platforms, and research aircraft. The B-29 would serve again in combat during the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, conducting both conventional bombing and mining operations. The aircraft also served as the launching platform for groundbreaking research. A B-29 was used to air-launch the Bell X-1, the first aircraft to break the sound barrier. The type served as a testbed for various new systems and technologies that would shape the future of aviation. The Soviet Union, which interned several B-29s that made emergency landings in Soviet territory during the war, reverse-engineered the aircraft to produce the Tupolev Tu-4. 847 Tu-4s were built, giving the Soviet Union a strategic bombing capability that shaped the early Cold War. The B-29 also spawned improved versions. The B-50, powered by more powerful Pratt & Whitney R-4360 engines and featuring a taller vertical tail and strengthened structure, served through the 1950s. The commercial aviation world benefited as well. The Boeing 377 Stratocruiser passenger aircraft was derived from B-29 technology, and its descendants, the Guppy cargo aircraft, continue in service today with NASA. The Enola Gay was preserved and, after decades of storage and restoration work spanning 20 years, now resides in the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center in Virginia. Boxcar is displayed at the National Museum of the United States Air Force near Dayton, Ohio. 22 B-29s have survived to preservation. Remarkably, Two aircraft, named Fifi and Doc, have been restored to flying condition and continue to take to the skies, thrilling crowds at air shows and serving as living reminders of an extraordinary aircraft and the momentous events in which it played the starring role. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress stands as one of the most significant military aircraft in history. It represented the pinnacle of propeller-driven bomber technology, incorporating innovations that were years ahead of their time. From its pressurized crew compartments to its sophisticated fire control systems, the B-29 set new standards that influenced aircraft design for decades. But the Superfortress is remembered for more than its technical achievements. It is remembered as the weapon that brought Japan to its knees, ending the most destructive war in human history. The conventional firebombing campaign destroyed 66 Japanese